with the mind of a scholar. I'm a scholar with the mind of MC. I'm a social studies student forever, like probably everybody in here, or should I say humanities, because there's language and there's, social studies and everything that falls under that super unsung area of study. Classroom teacher for years and now working in Austin ISD as a cultural proficiency and inclusiveness specialist, which is basically just early educational equity, elementary educational equity, if you will. It's an honor to be here. And I'm a parent of two, a husband of one. My wife is a scholar in curriculum instruction. And my son is 9, loves to hoop and write. We're releasing the book together. My daughter is 4, and she is teaching us how to unschool. So good evening.
Hi, my name is Guadalupe Parra, but I go by Lupi. I'm a bilingual special education teacher. I was at Pecan Springs, and then this year I moved over to Jordan. So my heart is in the East Austin community. I'm a Houston native, Chicana. My parents are from Matamoros, Tamaulipas, so that's what this girl represents. And I'm excited to be here and be part of this conversation with you guys. I see Babu, I see Lorena, I see Queeth, and I'm like, oh, I've worked with these people before. So I know the rest of you are new, but I'm very excited with this collaboration and getting to work with all of y'all.
Good evening, I'm Grace Zamorano. I currently work at LBJ High School as a Gear Up counselor. Prior to that, I worked at Sadler Means Young Women's Leadership Academy, which is an all-girls open enrollment school in East Austin. And I was there from the inception of the school. So for the past 6 years, I got to see that school really grow and flourish. Prior to that, I've also worked in college admissions in the Washington, D.C. area, both in undergrad and graduate admissions, specifically in diversifying the honors college programs at those universities. And prior to that, as I mentioned earlier, I was also a high school teacher right out of college, where I had the distinct honor of getting to work with Eric Ramos when he was a high school student. In terms of my family, I live in Pflugerville, right outside Austin, and I have an 8-year-old daughter who keeps me on my toes every day. She loves tennis, she loves news, and we're taking the day off tomorrow so that we can go vote together. So that's something that we're really excited to make happen. And again, like Lupi said, I'm just really excited to be part of this and learn more. So yeah, I think I'm sending it to Eric next. I think you're next on the list. Thank you.
Yeah, so my name's Eric Ramos. I'm from South Texas, originally from Kingsville, but then moved to a small town called Furias. Then came to Austin for college and really haven't left except for 1 year for a job. I currently teach at Martin Middle School here in Central East Austin. This is my 6th year there, 7th year teaching. I go back and forth between teaching history and special ed. This year I'm doing special education, kind of go where they need me, basically. Past few years, I've started getting a lot more involved in various district committees and local school board and other politics that I tend to rile people up sometimes with, but what else am I going to do in my spare time? And I guess that's it for me.
Hi there, I'm Carlicia. And like Eric said, hopping around, teaching different things. I go between often social studies and English. I'm right now at, a small school downtown, private school, Headwaters, where I'm teaching English and social justice, and actually got tapped by Lorena and Roberto to teach these courses in her absence. And really miss history, but feel very excited to bridge that gap between English and social studies. And it feels like a humanities course all in one, and I'm doing both sides, and I really love that. The freedom of a private school is what I really enjoyed. Before that, I taught public school in Illinois, outside of Chicago and Evanston. I taught high school history. Found the curriculum to be so tight that it kind of popped me out. I came down here to Austin to study screenwriting. And after years of just doing grant writing, writing screenplays and things like that, I came to back to teaching and found Headwaters and found a good place where there's space for me to explore. And also on that side, the exploration is one side, but the other side is a very limited kind of homogenous student body population that feels like it might eventually pop me out. So there's that, but that's me.
All right, I guess it's my turn. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Davis. I am currently at St. Andrews Episcopal High School in South Austin. I am the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and I'm also the Upper School Ed Tech. I have been here for 5 years. Before that, I am from Washington, D.C., but I was at the Bullish School in Potomac, Maryland. And before that, I was at Houghton Arms School for 3 years. I'm thankful for Lorena for reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity. And I'm excited to work with you all.
Good evening, everybody. Roberto Germán, and I am Lorena's, I don't want to say better half.
Yeah, don't.
Because, you know, that might be some static for the rest of the evening here after this is over. Lorena's husband, and happy to be here. Career-long educator. Many years in school leadership, currently serving as the director of the middle school at Headwater School in downtown Austin. Co-founded a multicultural classroom, and just somebody who's passionate about serving the community in which I live, Southeast Austin in particular. Happy to be here to connect with you all, to learn with you all, to grow with you all. And like Bavu, I'm also a scholar MC.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Harrison. I just started my 9th year teaching at Round Rock High School in Round Rock ISD, which is a suburb of Austin. And for the first time, I hope not to finish the year because I'm running for Round Rock ISD School Board. And so I'm really excited about that. I am an organizer, so I'm a community organizer, and I have been working for a long time on an inside-outside strategy to undo racism in my suburban district. And it got to a point where I realized, you know, I could leverage my power and be more effective sitting in the seat of power on the school board. We don't have any Black representation. As a Black woman, that's important to me. I believe that it's vital that we talk about race in the suburbs and that we talk about race with white kids, and we support Black kids when there's just 9% of them in a district, because I often find that their struggle is harder and they are not seen and not heard. So I love my district. It's where I grew up and went to school, and I am passionately fighting with such a deep and critical love on this unique journey. I don't know if I said, but I teach marketing. So I teach young entrepreneurs. I'm a career and technical education teacher, and I came to education by way of alternative certification, and I've never loved anything more. So I'm happy to be here tonight.
Hello, everyone. Amazing to see you. I'm sorry I was late. I was helping a challenged educator, meaning that she had a difficult situation she needed to talk about, that she called me at 7:55, but that's okay. My name is Carmela Valdez. I teach kindergarten dual language at Bettis Elementary on the southeast side. I am also from South Texas. Eric, I didn't even know this about you. From Robstown, Texas, home of the Fighting Cotton Pickers. We'll talk about that later. And it's true. It's a real thing. And I currently live, we moved to Houston, came to UT to go to school many, many years ago. And sorry, I've had a little bit of wine. I live with my mom, my sister, and her 2 sons, Felix, who's 3, and Hugo, who's about just turned 1 year old. And I consider myself not just a multilingual educator, I consider myself a social justice and a writing educator. So even the tinies, they deserve the best from all of us. So I try to live up to that every day. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was great. And I know we've all left things out. because we could do that forever, but just know that we are in the presence of greatness here in each other. So we have 4 questions. We're going to jump right in because our time, I want to respect everybody's time. So Queen is going to do the first 2. I'll do the next 2. And, keep in mind that we're not all going to be able to speak for all of them. So, if the first one you feel like has been answered and you'd be echoing, then just hold off for the next one. Make sure you're not taking up too much space, all that good stuff, so we can hear all the voices, but definitely speak from your own, kind of your own position here. Go ahead, Queen.
So like the first question is about the present moment, and it's with the pandemic. And man, we go right to it. I kind of sometimes feel like we should have a warm up, but the question is this: what were your experiences and challenges when schools closed due to COVID-19? And I didn't have an order that I was wanting to answer this. I always like kind of in my classes to start in the order of I see and then do the reverse order. So we can kind of put that reverse order and bring it back to Carmela and just let go from there. Or if anybody wants to jump and really feels like they want to speak to that. But again, I want to hear what your experiences and what your challenges were when schools closed due to COVID-19.
So my experiences, if I may begin, are that a lot of some of my students didn't have technology because we had not given technology to the tiny people. Some people didn't have really good internet access, and so they struggled with that. So there were equity issues but at the same time, I also think that from what I saw, that there were so many people who sort of pobrecitos, the people that were in at my school or in our community, and thought, well, they're just not going to be able to do it. They just can't do it. When so many families stood by their students and worked tirelessly to make sure that their students had access to a good education. I would receive assignments at 9 o'clock at night because families would work all day and then go home and work with their students because they knew that an education was important to them. So there were inequities, absolutely, but I think sometimes the outside community pobrecito us a little bit in that we were sort of the scapegoat for this can't happen because of this. When I saw parents do amazing things with their families and their students, so I was really proud to be a part of that.
I think if we're going backwards, I'm next. So the biggest challenge for me was actually me. I really had to get my mind right. I personally, as an individual, had a lot of anxiety and panic around COVID-19. And I knew that I had to get myself together as an educator and as a Black woman, because I knew that when education resumed in any form or fashion, educators, particularly Black educators, are healers. And if I wasn't right, there was no way I could provide that healing for my community. So I had to take the time to center myself and get myself together because I was really struggling. I wasn't sleeping. I was panicking. One thing I found was, well, actually 2 things. Number one, when we returned, educators weren't really consulted about what the virtual experience should or could be. And so it was really frustrating because we were really unable to meet the needs of students. And what my district said was, well, we're going to prioritize equity, which is their loose understanding of equity, which means they didn't know what they were talking about. And so their understanding of equity was that we were all going to be asynchronous because everyone didn't have access. And that they were going to offer meals, but they were going to offer them at inconvenient times where families couldn't access them, but hey, they're offering them. And so it was frustrating to feel like everything about us was done without us. And being able to provide and to support our students. And that's still a hard thing to work through 9 months later as we're still in this COVID situation.
So the greatest challenge for me as a school leader was trying to process very rapidly all the information around COVID, but also then having to pivot very quickly to implement all these new systems, some of which we had never utilized before, and trying to understand the needs of the different constituencies, be responsive to it, be strategic and mindful of our approach, and at the same time, being able to periodically step back to see it from a macro level, because we were so ingrained in it. I mean, just working endlessly, working through the vacation. So like, you know, then getting to a point where you're kind of hitting the wall because we've been working on this thing, you know, for months on end, and not being able to necessarily see everything clearly and catch all the different nuances that we needed to sort out, because we were just so deep in it all the time that it just got to a point where, you know, things weren't necessarily always as clear as we wanted them to be. And so, and then, you know, oftentimes feeling that, well, we're doing our best to try to communicate the plans. Everything's changing every week. So the plans were changing every week. And then the folks on the receiving end, there was some frustration with communication, but, you know, folks sometimes didn't understand why we were having this difficulty, because like when you spend so much time creating a plan, then you have to blow it up because now it's moved into this stage and now it's moved back to this stage. So not always receiving the grace on the other side of things, or patience from some of the different constituents that we're managing.
For me, it was more about equity and having my tech hat on and making sure students had hotspots and driving around delivering laptops and hotspots to kids, and advocating for my breakthrough students, because a lot of people just counted them out, and a lot of teachers were worried about assignments and things being incomplete. And I'm just like, are you thinking about what's going on in the household? Do they have adequate internet access? Do you know if they're having parents in the household during the daytime, if they're babysitting? What's going on during, like, in the evening? Like, just being sure that we're being mindful of all the things that we're thinking about for our students, because we come from a place of privilege at my school, and a lot of people don't really think outside of that lens. So just making sure that we were checking our blind spots when it came to technology and access.
Yeah, I second you on that, Sam. I was really surprised at how many of my students coming from affluence were still very limited in their ability to claim space in their homes. They had very little, like the families who have multiple kids on technology bandwidth was just tiny, and I was losing them constantly. But honestly, that was all the issue I had with work, and it was, for me, it was about my personal life. My mother had just moved. I moved her here to Austin, and she has pre-existing conditions. And for me, everything else was just like way down. And it was about, how do I keep my mom safe in the city that she doesn't even know? How do I navigate this? So a little bit of frustration I think I had around like sort of this sort of demand of like, come here, let's meet, let's talk about all this stuff for the kids. And I'm like, I need to figure out how to get my mom groceries. So the balance in that was my biggest challenge.
I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing was how it really just highlighted the structural inequities of public schools completely. I mean, you look at even just the basic questionnaires we were asking the families. We were asking if they had internet access, but we didn't ask what kind. You got 6 people trying to use Zoom at the same time. That ain't gonna work if you have the basic internet. And then the solution was the district provided these Wi-Fi buses, but the buses went from like 11 to 2, and school goes from 8 to 3 or 8 to 4, depending on your grade level. So you could only work at those times. And then if you look at like specifically my attendance zone, the Eastside Memorial Vertical team, We had one Wi-Fi bus in our whole attendance zone. It was at Metz Elementary. Most of the houses around there have already been gentrified. Most of our kids don't even live around where that one Wi-Fi bus was. There wasn't one in Montopolis. There wasn't one in Riverside. There wasn't one in Springdale, Go Valley, none of those neighborhoods. And so we look at what kind of access they have, and then we're expected to give them grades because it took forever to tell them that it was going to be pass-fail. So I have kids constantly emailing saying, am I going to pass? Am I going to high school? What's going to happen? And then don't even get me started on the fact that all the SPED kids were just thrown on the back burner. We're 7 months in and we still don't have all the answers on what we're going to do with our SPED kids. And I'm going to stop there so I don't go a full hour.
I would echo everything Eric said. And to that, I think I would also add, one of the challenges was for me, understanding all of those challenges that Eric just mentioned, but also having to temper my inner white supremacy and my inner capitalist drive to say, well, you should be doing this. Go sit at that bus at Metz Elementary if you have to, you know? And really having to temper those own expectations that I have in my mind, which I think is a constant battle for us, as this is the culture that we've been grown up in. You know, this is the culture that we were successful in. But after talking to some of our, you know, my very high achieving students, and really getting some of those one-on-one conversations with them finally, oftentimes not till the end of the school year, like in May, you know, just having to sit with that myself and knowing that as much as I advocate for the students, again, that capitalism, that sense of white supremacy rears its head often. And that's something that I have to manage for myself as well, constantly, when working with the students and thinking about what's best for them and for their families and for their future.
For me, being a person with severe anxiety, I personally started to take it very easy at the beginning, and I was really shocked with myself that it wasn't as big as, I don't know if my brain was just not processing quite right, but for me, my head just went straight to my SPED babies. And like Eric said, I could probably do the whole thing. Yeah, a tangent of special ed and what it's looking like for our kids right now. And so it was just constant calls, like, yeah, just the basic calls of, do you have internet? What can we do to support? And I started throwing just academics out of the window, at least when it was in the spring semester. And we were just doing community circles on Friday with the kids. And it was anyone can join, any grade level. And that's what even the parents were joining. And it was just such a huge connection with them that, like, at least we can still talk this way and play games and be silly. But it was missing that human touch. Like, we were just so worried about grades and passing. And it was like, they were just missing that human touch from their educators and the people that wanted to work with them.
Yeah, all I can add to that is it was a challenge to accept everything that was being made clear at the same time. You know, if you're talking about mid-March or so. And then by June, you know, the most Black affirming month in US history, you have to make the consideration of this pendulum swing that power does, you know, whenever there's Black affirmation in plain mainstream awareness and sight. So I started thinking about that as well, like, what's after this? But all of it, you know. So those have been the two challenges that come to mind that haven't already been said.
No, Bobby, what you said was just powerful. A challenge to accept all that was being made clear. I love what you just said. For me, this situation has amplified and magnified the problems that already existed. And that's just the way you said it was like a much more lead with love kind of way. It's a challenge to accept what has been made clear. Something that's also been made clear is the racism and white supremacy that's in our society, prevalent in our country. And that's where this next question is, and we're going to open it up to everybody. And that is, what impacts, if any, did rising racial unrest have on your experience educating students? And I know, for my quick 2 cents, it's a challenge every day to decide if I'm going to bring it up. And sometimes I feel bad about myself if I don't. And sometimes I'm like, give it a rest. You're supposed to be focusing on engineering. But that's something that Grace was echoing, that's something that I feel like we kept getting conditioned to do, is to not talk about it. So that's something that I know I'm pushing myself to try to incorporate every day. And I love the new framework I'm studying by Dr. Goldie Muhammad that gives me an opportunity to do that. But for the rest of y'all, let me hear how did rising racial unrest have on your experience educating students? This is for anybody, so y'all can just unmute and have at it.
I'll speak again. At that time, I was still at Sadler Means, and I will say it's a beautiful school. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of amazing things happening there, and we had, at least at that time, there's a whole new leadership, and I can't speak too much to what's happening today, but we had a very open opportunities to talk about current events. And so I will say that we, like Lupi mentioned, we did start to have weekly SEL lessons, if you will, and we just jumped right into it. As soon as all those conversations started, we had conversations about what does Black Lives Matter really mean. We even had our own African American and Latina, Black and Brown students saying things like, all lives matter. And so we had some very frank conversations with multiple teachers across different races and ethnicities, just having open conversations with them, because it really felt otherwise inauthentic for us to sit and have a meeting, like, let's talk about SEL and growth mindset, while there are protests happening in the street, while there are, major acts of violence happening against Black and Brown bodies. And so we just kind of addressed it head on. And of course, it was an optional lesson. It was during quarantine time, so students logged on as they wanted to. But I do think it led to some really awesome conversations with the girls who did show up.
I'll speak. I think, again, of two things. Number one, I think about how it impacted me as an educator and as a person. Sometimes I think we think we're like educator robots. We have to get in there and do, and we're not counting the cost of the weight of the world on us as people, especially as Black and Indigenous people of color. So there was an incredible heaviness. It was like swimming through mud to teach, and it was hard because I was just tired. And, being in the suburbs, having Black students in the suburbs, we have a Black student union, and there's a lot of internalized racism and internalized racial oppression of like not wanting to make waves or not wanting to speak about, Black experiences. And I find that this time, though painful, really liberated a lot of our Black students that were working so hard to conform to whiteness. And so even though it was difficult, it made real some of the things that we maybe have talked about that seemed conceptual to them in like our meetings and in our time together. And so it made those places of solidarity even more important and vital.
For me, it made me realize just how important it is to have these discussions, and how, for me growing up and just being in Texas education system my whole life, I feel like I wasn't hearing it other than like, like designated safe spaces. Like it wasn't like still out there that you could just talk about it with anyone and really feel like we can do this. And I went from gen ed to SPED. And so the reason was the inequity. I saw it and I was like, I want to take care of this. I want to help support this. And it was just realizing just how many inequities there are. And I feel like all of this has helped me speak up about it. And before it was like, being conditioned for me as a kid, it was from my parents, like, no contestes, you say yes, you don't respond back, you say yes to everything is correct, you don't know better, like it is what it is, and you take it. And so even I feel like going through the education program, it was like, you're not allowed to say like anything about political parties or anything. And it's, or, basic Christopher Columbus, like still get him to do all of the pictures and the drawings. And it's like, well, that's not quite what happened. How about we tell the kids what really did happen? And, and even it can be age appropriate for anyone. And so I think just having those conversations with the people, I feel like it's the most important part, just talking about it and acknowledging, like, how can we make this better? How can we make this safe for our kids?
This feels really still very up for me right now. Like, I'm thinking about it in past tense, but I'm like, this is my right now. A feeling of, I'm constantly doing a lot of work around staying patient and loving and kind. And I feel like we have a situation now, particularly with my high school students in social justice, where they know the language. They're educating themselves on social media so well. They come and they're dropping the knowledge, all cops are bad and ACAB, and they're saying all the things. But then when we talk about implicit bias, they're having trouble locating themselves in this bigger puzzle of equity. So they're like, they want to be on the right side of history. Anti-bias, anti-racism, that's on the right side of history. They're all there. But I think that culturally what they're doing is the same thing that we're doing as a society in a way. And I feel so scared. I feel so scared that we're going to say all this stuff and we're going to do all these trainings. And at the end of the day, we're going to still slip right through. We're going to miss. It's like to get to a place of justice and equity is like getting through the head of a needle pin. And I think that we're going to miss it. And I fear that.
I think for me, the most powerful thing, which it kind of was a downside, that a lot of this happened, some of this happened in the summer because there wasn't like organized class time. So I had a couple of these mini conversations through former students that would email me because they still knew my work email address. And I think the biggest thing, or the biggest question, was when a student asked me, when the Man in the Main protest broke out in June, I guess, why that case became big and why that didn't happen back in April when Mike Ramos was killed. Here, literally blocks, I always walk by where that happened. And that's one of the reasons they emailed me, because they know I live near there. They're like, why didn't that happen when that case happened? Why did it happen when this case happened? And so, like, it just kind of made me wish we were still in class, because in history you have a lot more leeway than other subjects to be able to talk about this. And if someone walks in the room, it's easy to say how you're on topic. And so, like, I wish I could have had like a full class discussion to be able to say why certain cases get the notoriety that others don't, and what the town that it happens in, the state that it happens in, how that impacts what the response is.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our third question, which might be our last question. We'll see. Let me put it in here for you. So how do you believe, this is the part where we get to dream a little bit, which is the kind of stuff Jose tells me all the time, right? So how do you believe we should recreate education systems during this recovery to work for all children in ways that it did not work before? We know that it wasn't there, right? We've already talked about how this has highlighted some of those inequities. So I think it would be great for us to come up with some real tangible, practical stuff. Like what do we need to do to bring about some changes? Like what here in Austin or in this, area, we can even localize it that way, or you can think nationally. What do we need? What do we need to recreate in our systems?
Social studies.
Social studies
Should be the center and the apex. Hold on. Because it has identity in it, and place in it, and people in it, and history in it, and multiple perspectives, frame of reference, all of those pieces in it. If you think like a historian, and then it has civics in it, and if you're able to think, I just heard from Grace and Eric a perfect example of how far that can go. if you position people to think like, historians in relevant ways at a young age. They just told a real life story when we first signed in. So that, I think, put in that, and then also just how powerfully you can teach language and everything else that's typically classified as ELA through that same discipline. And back to a reference to the Gholdy Muhammad book, Cultivating Genius, it really digs into that really well and is right on time. I don't think that just happened to drop, I think it was supposed to happen like those. We needed that. So I bring that up just to say that I believe that a lot of issues of arguing about which lives matter and being confused and polarized through, political discourse, a lot of that would be cut off at the pass if people weren't being raised from kinder to be straight up ignorant when it comes to what ought to be at the center of the curriculum in the first place. So we should fix that right away.
I think it's really interesting what we're doing now. I hate Zoom, by the way, but I will say that it's been fascinating to witness the opportunities it has created. So for some students, sometimes being in the school environment doesn't feel as safe as being at home. And also doesn't provide the same type of flexibility in terms of accessing meals, snacks, family readily for, certain things that are happening in the household. And then, you're relying upon this young person to support certain things. And, so it's also thinking about the notion of how we continue to build our families up and keep our families together, right? Where there's a lot of pull. There's a lot of pull in our society, especially in Black and Brown communities, to break our families up. And so this has been a fascinating time to witness people managing and many people, appreciating the opportunity to spend more time with the family, to spend more time in the community, to actually get to know your neighbors and to, hey, we got this whole situation going on. We've been forced to, in many ways, forced to lean more into being in community. At least that's been my experience. And that has been refreshing through all of this. Getting to hear more from my neighbors, getting to know my neighbors more, hearing the different things that they're struggling with, but also hearing the different things that they're leveraging with this time that we've had of, all being at home a lot. And so, and then additionally, I have a lot of questions and curiosities about like, hey, why weren't we doing some of this stuff before? So one of the things we're doing right now, and many schools are doing, are intentionally trying to work on developing outdoor learning spaces. And I'm like, this seems like a good thing. Why weren't we doing this before? Why do we have the kids stuck, within the four walls all the time, right? Like the kids need to be outside. They need the fresh air. They need to get in touch with nature, right? Like we as people, right? As human beings, we need to get back to being in touch with nature and whatnot. And our kids need to be moving around, especially in the public schools where, limited time for PE and recess and whatnot. We need to get the kids moving around. So engage their bodies and minds differently. And then it's really interesting, and I wonder how many schools are thinking and talking about this, but when I think about the, the hybrid stuff and all the Zooming and whatnot, I'm like, we're a private school, but I think this could happen private or public, where we got kids taking classes with us who are not here in Austin. They're in Mexico, they're in China, they're in, I think I got one in Poland or something. They're in Colorado, they're in Florida, and but they're being present with one another via Zoom. And so even if we were to think about this on a smaller scale, it's like, all right, well, how can we utilize what we're doing now to open up more educational opportunities, especially for those in schools that don't necessarily have the resources. So you have a program that you're offering, I don't know, in Westlake, let's say. They seem to have a lot of resources. And so, what we're doing via Zoom presents itself with some opportunities for kids to engage in some of the educational programs without necessarily being bused to Westlake. I don't know if everybody want to do that. But you do want access to certain programs and certain educational opportunities. And so, it just makes me curious about how courageous and how willing are we going to be in terms of innovation, and not just in this current moment, but like really as we move forward, how innovative are we going to be willing to get?
I agree with everything you guys were, amazing. I would say one thing for me that, and I don't know how it is in a non-public education arena, but I think one of the things that is most damaging in what I know as public education is a deficit mindset, is the fact that everyone is not seen for the beauty that they bring, but the deficit that they are. They lack language, they lack vocabulary, they lack culture, they lack experience, no, they don't. It's just not your experience. So it's sort of, the deficit mindset is sort of masking racism, right? And colorism and all of those things. Yeah, and I find it so, like, I don't even have words. The place in the world that a deficit mindset should be least at is education, right? I have students that are amazing. I had a 6-year-old show up to my writing lesson dressed as a scarecrow today. I mean, brilliant, right? But is he seen as, well, he doesn't speak enough English? Well, he doesn't know enough letters because he mixes up English and Spanish. All of those things, no. I mean, you're looking at it all wrong. He sees 2 languages together. He sees, right? So it's just a deficit way of looking at students, and it's especially students of color, multilingual students, that is oppressive.
All right, last comment. Who's got it?
I don't want to take up too much space, but I'll say briefly, I love the way the hierarchy of teacher at the top and everybody else down is destroyed here in this space. We're all equal size boxes. I love that in our staff meetings. I love that in our classes. I love that in all the spaces. And I think we can take that into however we re-envision the human hierarchies. We have to destroy them in our own classes and in our own organizations if we're going to expect the world to reflect dismantling of these hierarchies.
All right. Wow, that was a lot, and it was good. A couple of things right before we wrap up. So one is, Queen is going to send out a message at some point to all of you participants in order for us to get 2 or 3 people to meet up with him and a photographer. We have the date, which is November 7th. So if you're available on that date, we don't have a time yet to meet up. He's going to take some pictures, and he's going to get a little bit of your testimony, and we'll record some of that. I'm not sure what else is involved. Maybe Megan or Kalila can clarify. But yeah. But so that'll happen November 7th, I think. And so yeah, so stay tuned on that. But as far as tonight, thank you so much for your time and for your insights and for jumping in. There was a lot that was said here that I think, I understand why this is happening, because I know that, you know, from reading so many things across the country that educators are publishing, like, I'm just not hearing all of this. I'm just not hearing all of these points, right? The ones that really impact us and impact our students. So, you know, I think that taking the time and the space for us to have these conversations is going to yield something.